Prior to learning that there was a solution to active addiction, I was trying to solve my feelings of worthlessness, emptiness, loneliness, and isolation through substance misuse. In fact, even before that, before I became a drug addict and an alcoholic, the way that I ate food, the way that I looked at pornography, the way that I related to other people was underwritten by a craving that I now recognize as one of the determinants and defining attributes of addiction. If we can talk of addiction having attributes, more of a trait really. But so seems like an odd thing to say, but even prior to discovering 12-step recovery, I was on a kind of unconscious quest. The reason that 12-step recovery works is because it acknowledges and addresses the fact that anybody that has an addiction issue, an attachment issue, or it could be argued any kind of infatuation or disproportionate or inordinate connection to phenomena is looking for purpose, meaning, and connection. So like my life before, even before I was a drug addict, the way that I ate chocolate and food was problematic, obsessive, compulsive. Like the way I related to chocolate bars was not in a way, I feel like the industry behind chocolate are aware that their product is potentially dangerous. They use sensuality. The whole profession of marketing is about endowing a product with qualities that it can't possibly have. And as soon as you're using chocolate or sex or shopping or gambling or even drink or drugs to address a problem that's beyond their remit, you're in the realm of addiction. My life prior to recovery was chaotic, painful, and was defined by trying to achieve connections in erroneous ways. See, this is like the reason that I'm like certain that 12-step recovery can be applied to any facet of life is because long before I was a crack addict or an alcoholic, my behaviours were, I was exhibiting the tendencies that would later become identifiable as addiction. So, and then subsequent to the success of this program in removing my obsessive and dependent use of drugs and alcohol, I reverted to having problematic relationships with chocolate and sex and relationships. So the program, I think, is like this incredible protean tool that is so powerful and flexible that it can be applied to any area of your life. It can be something obvious like crack addiction or something more insidious like codependent relationships. Whatever it is in your life that's causing you problems, the 12 steps can be utilized as a kind of a map out of that situation. And I know this not because of any kind of high-cultured, highly educated, sort of academic perspective. I know it only because I've got it really bad. I'd spend a lot of time around like drug addicts, proper like messed up crackheads, smackheads and lunatics. And I still sometimes think when I'm listening to them, I'm still worse than you. Even like as a person that's got 16 and a half years free from substance misuse, even as a person that works the 12 steps continually and constantly, I'm still mental. I'm still continually vying with a madman to have dominion over my own mind. Like the reason this is antithetical to most self-help programs, in my opinion, is it ain't a self-help program at all. It's the acknowledgement and understanding that as long as I'm engaged in the self-centered pursuit of my own contentment, I can never be fulfilled. It's a program that has taken me from a position of self-obsession and a kind of relentless pursuit of pleasure to the initially reluctant but ever more devotional acceptance of a life of service. For me, I've been referred to by people that know more about 12-step recovery than I do as a bog standard drug addict, meaning that my substance misuse is like that it's like it ticks all the boxes of standard addiction that once I start, I can't stop. I use drink and drugs to deal with the feelings of worthlessness, low self-esteem, inability to trust other people, all of which, when I break it down, are spiritual issues. Feeling like I'm not valuable enough to take a place in the world, that's a spiritual issue. Feeling that I can't trust other people, that's a spiritual issue. And so this program is like, it's a sort of a, what do I want to say? It's kind of like it's like why I adore it is it's robust enough and multivalent enough to address wherever your problems are on the scale. This program can be used to address them. The more chronic they are, the easier it is in some respects. Like for me, like when I first started using this program, I was addicted to heroin, I was addicted to crack, I was unable to work, I was unable to have healthy relationships with people. Again, this is why I'm able to endorse this program and be an example of its success, is because of the desperation of my initial condition, not because of some high attained state. My entire life is lived through the lens of 12-step recovery now. Even though it's no longer about one day at a time staying free from drink and drugs, it's more one day at a time not forming unhealthy attachments to other people, not obsessing about my work in life, not trying to control other people, not berating myself, not continually, gently migrating back to mental habits of self-harm that can lead to physical behaviours of self-harm. The way that I fully discovered that I was fucked is because my drug addiction towards the end was like very vivid and lurid is one way of describing it. Cliched is another way of describing it. I used to use crack and heroin with street sleepers. I was never very good at socialising, so the way that I would acquire crack and heroin is I mean, in a sense, all the signs were there that this was going to be a problematic pursuit. When I discovered this program, I was using crack and heroin every day, I was using alcohol all the time, and I was, more importantly, none of those things were working for me anymore. I was miserable anyway. What I like about this program, what is beautiful about it, is it's a tool for change. It's a method for moving from unconsciousness to consciousness, from unaware to aware. That process for me needs to be taken not just from the unconscious state I was in when I first started working this program to the state I'm in now. On a more microscopic level, it's worked hour by hour. As soon as I'm unhappy, as soon as I'm irritable or discontent, as soon as I'm afraid, I recognize that I've gone out of alignment with my program and that I need to take steps. The first step I have to take is that I have to admit that there's a problem. Most people, or a lot of people, or people without a program might say, oh look, life's meant to be challenging and troubling. There's a lot of people, for example, with the obvious issue of drinking, a lot of people think, well, I can't, this is not a problem, this is simply the way that I live life. You know, I try not to have a kind of league table or pyramid of Maslow's pyramid of problems where some problems are more worthy than others. I think if you're suffering, you're suffering. Whenever I am unaware, whenever I am anxious, whenever I am problematic to the people around me, I recognize that there are systems that I can deploy and surrender to that will mean that my relationship with other people and myself are more successful. The reason I think that 12-step recovery is amazing is that drugs and alcohol serve as the perfect object for infatuation and obsession. Like if you're an alcoholic or a drug addict, it's pretty obvious you've got a problem. There's a distillation of the overt attachment to a material object that's much less obvious if you're obsessed with other people's approval or or getting involved in negative relationships. So like, But the 12 steps will work wherever you apply it on that scale. Firstly, you admit that what you're doing is problematic and that your life has become unmanageable. Second, you come to believe that a power greater than yourself can restore you to sanity, that it's possible not to engage in that behavior anymore. And third, you make a decision to turn your life and will over to the care of God as you understand God. Now that is where the zeal hinted at in the second step can become compounded. And I know that a lot of people resist and reject 12-step recovery specifically because of the overt and somewhat traditional sounding references to God. That's why, like, when I talk about this program, the first 3 steps become, are you fucked? Could you not be fucked? Are you on your own gonna unfuck yourself? The third step becomes about willingness to accept help, willingness to change. And the rather more overt spiritual aspect of that is brilliantly addressed in 12-step philosophy with the acknowledgement that all of us have a distinct and personal understanding of a higher power and that nobody has the right to prescribe that to another person. The only thing you need is a conception of a power that is greater than yourself and that is benign and even loving. How I feel that this is practically applied is that in my own life, I've always had a tendency to self-centered introspection, agonizing fractal loops of thought that are inescapable to me. And after a while, after my various gamuts in addiction, my various circuits through addictive behaviors, it became more and more clear that whatever the solution was to my problem, it wasn't going to be found in my head. And I think that's true of you too. Whatever the solution is to this problem of being you, to this sense of anxiety, to this lack of fulfillment, the answer's not going to be found by the answer's not going to be found in your own fucking head. You have to let new information in. So the third step is being willing to ask for help. And that help can be from a sort of an omnipotent supernatural entity, or it can be from a group of trusted people. It can be from a mentor. Essentially though, it's a willingness to do things differently. So the first 3 steps are, 1, there's a problem. 2, it's possible for problems to change. 3, I on my own will not be able to solve this problem. And that can be a difficult paradigm to accept, even if it's something you've been working for multiple years. For me now, still, it can take a while for me to acknowledge there's a problem, I need to stop. It's possible for that problem to change. This isn't just the conditions of the universe which will continually reinstantiate and reiterate themselves no matter what I do. It is possible for things to be different. That's where the optimism and hope that's inherent within this problem becomes vivified. It's beautiful after you've been trapped in addictive behavior, or even if you've been trapped in a pattern that you would be reluctant to call addictive behavior. It's beautiful to acknowledge that change is possible. Then the next progression to accepting the possibility of change, being willing to surrender to an alternative method, a different method, to begin taking on a different perspective, that's when you get real relief. Step 3 is an aspect of my own recovery that I continually return to. Normally, when I'm anxious or fearful, there's something that I need to surrender. Often, the problem is that I'm taking too much control in a situation. Is that I've nominated myself as my own higher power. I give myself all these jobs in life, I give myself the job of being in charge of my wife's mental health. At different times in my life, I've given myself the job of being in charge of the British government and the global media. Someone's got to do something about this, I'll do it. It's too much pressure for me. I basically find it hard to sit still on public transport. Why I'm giving myself the role of bringing about a global revolution is an absolute mystery. 12-step recovery in its early foundational steps. 1, there's a problem. 2, the problem can change. 3, I'm going to need help. That tool is deceptively simple because it's an invitation to let go of your perspective. And what I have discovered the more that I've worked this program is that my perspective is everything. My perception is my reality. And that if that changes, everything changes. As soon as I'm willing to have a different perspective. You know, if I don't see my eating as a problem, then I'm never going to change my eating. If I'm willing to acknowledge that it's problematic, then I have to believe that it's possible to change my diet. Then, if I'm willing to embrace the possibility that there's new information out there, that there are alternative methods, and at the sort of more esoteric extent of that scale, that even within myself, there are latent aspects of consciousness waiting to be awakened. If I'm willing to consider that, then change is possible. This is what this is. We're dealing with a program of change. That's the function of this. A facility, a tool to move you from one state of being to another state of being. Where it becomes distinct from any kind of personal development program that I've ever been involved in is that at its core is the acknowledgement that all of the problems that I experience are of my own making and have as their kind of centripetal object self-obsession, self-centeredness. And that what's profound about that is it eventually beautifully allies with far more mystical traditions, such as, like, you know, sort of most obviously Buddhism, that my fundamental problem is my belief that I am me. My fundamental problem is my entrenched sense of self. That, yeah, I can get over drugs and alcohol, not by fixating on drugs and alcohol, but by looking at what is it that requires the addiction? What does the wanting want? Where is this coming from? And once I've admitted there's a problem, come to believe that it could change, and become willing to turn my life and will over to the care of God as I understand God, then I am now in a position to begin to understand my patterns and habits a little more accurately. My own understanding of what I used to call a higher power, but as time goes on, I'm more and more willing to refer to by that particularly potent and troubling 3-lettered word, God. For me, it means, it's curious, you know, as a mental device, as a psychological scalpel, because it can perform functions that I have found impossible without it. What I mean by that is to accept the idea of a kind of overriding benevolence, to be able to believe that beyond my own cynicism, beyond my own pain, beyond my own fear, there is love. Beyond other people's faults and flaws, there is love and beauty. For me, what this becomes is a kind of a necessary fuel to continue living, because it's not that I have no counter to the atheistic perspective of, what, you mean that if there's not a good, I don't need a God in order to be kind to people. It's not that I need a God. It's how I came to believe in my own God is by acknowledging the limitations of my sensory experience, by recognizing that my own understanding of the world weren't working for me. It's not really that there needs to be some sort of dialectic aggression between believers and non-believers. If someone is an atheist, and many of my most trusted spiritual advisors are atheists, if it's working for you, atheism, then it's not a problem. That's sort of one of the things that's beautiful about this program. If you don't want it, then you're under no obligation to have it. But if your atheism isn't working for you, if your life isn't working for you, there are some alternative perspectives that you might want to consider. So my own understanding of God is that it's sometimes as basic and as simple as awareness itself, limitless awareness, oneness without separation. So if you're wondering how you can deploy this system, this program in your own life, whether or not you are a person that already has a 12-step program, that you're working around substance misuse or behavioral problems, or if you have a more insidious, vague, and amorphous sense that you could do with a program, this is how it functions. You acknowledge there's a problem, you become willing to change, you become willing to accept help, then you move into the I would say, structural body of a 12-step program, which is the process of making an inventory and sharing that inventory with someone else. Once you've done that, you will observe the traits, patterns, tropes, and behaviors that have built up your life. And this for me is the aspect of the 12-step program that is most easily utilized. It's the scaffold around which the rest of my life has been built. You share that inventory with another person because you don't want to be singularly and solely responsible for analysing your problems. You're the person that generates all these problems. You're a maniac, for Christ's sake. Having undertaken that inventory, you are able to see with new clarity what the patterns have been that you've engaged with throughout your life. Step 7 has once again, in its original form, an unavoidable mystical component. Humbly ask him to remove our problems. It's patriarchal. It's got the word him in it. But, for me, it was become aware and become open to the possibility of changing, even though you know that changing is going to be hard. Once you've reached that point, you will have a list, a clear inventory, and a much clearer understanding of what your life has been like. We think, don't we, that we are what goes on in our minds. We think that we are what we think, but in reality, we are what we do. If you were to look at a book of what I've thought about, it would be a pretty weighty Britannica, like Encyclopedia Britannica tome. But, when you look at what I've actually done, it's just he got up, he caused a bit of trouble, bit of skylarking and some philandering, he went back to bed. That's decades of work can be encompassed in that sentence. So once you've thoroughly inventoried your life, when I first inventoried my life, I had a different understanding of how the same way that I got thrown out of schools, I got thrown out of jobs, the same way that relationships when I was 16 were getting into trouble, relationships when I was 35 were getting into trouble because of my unconscious reiterated habits. Within the inventory too, you will be able to observe the harms that you have done to other people. Step 8 is about forgiveness. Step 9 is about restitution, making amends. And steps 10, 11, and 12 are about remaining continually aware, being willing to increase conscious contact with God as you understand God, developing a new awareness and sustaining it. And step 12 is about living a life of service. In a sense, the 12-step program takes you from a state of unaware self-obsession to a state of conscious service. So it's distinct and discrete from any self-help program that I've ever undertaken, because it's not about helping yourself at all, except in so much as by helping others, you access a different aspect of yourself. It astonishes me to accept that I'm never happier than when I'm helping other people. It still seems antithetical to my deeply entrenched individualistic, narcissistic tendencies. The magnetism of narcissism needs no further work or PR. The garden of my self-centeredness is continually irrigated, watered, fertilized, and nurtured. But my compassion, my kindness, these are things I need to be continually reminded of. And the genius of the 12-step program is that it, in a very sort of practicable way, explains, suggests, and presents a pathway from unconscious, unaware, self-serving mentality to a mentality of conscious and awake service. So what we're going to do through this course is just break down and discuss some of these principles in more detail and how they can be applied through a spectrum of problems, most notably and obviously my own problems, which have ranged from pretty serious psychiatric disorders and relatively chronic addiction to the more mundane and trivial tribulations of daily life.